Overthinking doesn't mean your brain is broken. It means it's working overtime to protect you. You replay conversations in your head. You analyze every possibility. You plan for the worst before anything even happens. And you think it's because something is wrong with you. But the truth is, overthinking is not a flaw. It's a survival mechanism. A brain that has seen pain tries to prevent it from happening again. The mind overthinks when the heart no longer feels safe. In this video, we're going to break down the real psychology behind overthinking, not the motivational nonsense, not just stop worrying advice, but the hidden connection between anxiety, trauma, perfectionism, and the brain's fight for control. And by the end, you will realize this: you don't need to silence your thoughts. You need to understand them. Your mind doesn't overthink because it wants to torture you. It overthinks because at some point in your life, it had to. Maybe you grew up in an environment where one wrong move caused chaos. Maybe you were judged, ignored, or punished for mistakes. Maybe you learned early that being careful kept you safe. So now your brain stays on alert, scanning every memory, every possibility, every outcome, not to annoy you, but to protect you. Overthinking is not a flaw. It is a hyperactive survival instinct. The brain remembers emotional pain the same way it remembers physical danger. That's why it keeps replaying conversations, reanalyzing decisions, and imagining worst-case scenarios, because somewhere inside, it still believes something bad might happen again. So before you blame yourself for overthinking, try to understand this. Your brain isn't anxious because it's weak. It's anxious because it still thinks you're in danger. And the moment you understand why you overthink is the moment you finally gain the power to control it, instead of letting it control you. Overthinking feels like a loop you can't escape. A thought that circles back again and again, even when you've already figured it out. But there's a science behind that loop. The brain is wired to finish stories. If something feels unresolved, uncertain, or unsafe, the brain keeps replaying it like an unfinished puzzle. That is why overthinkers can't let it go. Not because they're dramatic, not because they're weak, but because the brain refuses to rest until it feels completely safe, emotionally, mentally, and socially. This is why you reread texts, why you replay arguments, why you think of the perfect response hours later. Your brain is searching for control in a moment where you felt powerless. Overthinking is the mind's way of saying, I don't want this to hurt me again. And the more you try to force yourself to stop thinking, the more your brain fights back because it believes the danger isn't over yet. Overthinking isn't loud because you're broken. It's loud because your brain thinks there's still a lesson you haven't learned, a threat you haven't avoided, or a wound that never fully healed. Overthinking doesn't start in the moment you notice it. It starts in the moment your nervous system learned it wasn't safe to relax. Maybe someone yelled at you for being wrong. Maybe love was unpredictable. Warm one day, cold the next. Maybe you were raised to stay alert, to anticipate moods, reactions, or danger. That kind of environment teaches the brain a silent rule. If I think harder, I can prevent pain. So even years later, even when the danger is gone, the mind keeps scanning, just in case. This is why overthinkers are often the most caring, most observant, most emotionally intelligent people. They didn't learn to think deeply for fun. They learned because their survival depended on it. Overthinking is not a personality trait. It is a protective adaptation. The brain doesn't care if you're tired. It cares if you're safe. That's why healing overthinking is not about thinking less. It's about teaching your brain that the danger has passed. Because once the mind finally feels safe, silence isn't scary anymore. It becomes peace. Overthinking is not just about thinking too much. It's about a desperate need for control. If you grew up in chaos, unpredictable parents, unstable relationships, or constant judgment, your brain learned something early. If I can predict everything, I can protect myself. So now, as an adult, you replay conversations, analyze texts, overplan, and rehearse every worst-case scenario, not because you're dramatic, but because certainty feels like safety. The problem? Life can't be controlled. People will still disappoint you. Situations will still shift. And the more you try to control everything, the more your mind controls you. You don't overthink because you're weak. You overthink because you were forced to grow up before you were ready. The real healing isn't in stopping the thoughts. It's in teaching your body that uncertainty is not danger, that you can survive without knowing every outcome, that you are safe even when life is unpredictable. Letting go isn't losing control, it's regaining peace. Overthinking isn't a habit, it's a self-worth survival system. When you don't feel good enough, your brain starts working overtime. Did I say the wrong thing? Are they upset with me? Do they still like me? Should I have done better? Every thought becomes a test. Every silence feels like rejection. Every mistake turns into proof that you're the problem. You don't overthink because you're indecisive. You overthink because you don't feel safe being yourself. Somewhere in your life, love became conditional. Be perfect, or you'll be criticized. Be useful, or you'll be ignored. Be agreeable, or you'll be rejected. So now you're stuck in a loop. You overthink to avoid failure. But the overthinking itself makes you feel like you're failing. Here's the truth most people never hear. You don't need clearer answers. You need permission to exist without earning approval. Your brain doesn't need more logic. It needs proof that you are worthy, even when you're unsure, imperfect, or silent. Overthinking ends the moment self-worth begins. People think self-awareness is a strength, but no one talks about what happens when it turns into self-surveillance. You don't just notice your actions, you monitor every breath, every word, every reaction. Like you're being watched, graded, and judged 24/7. You replay conversations. You analyze facial expressions. You decode silence like it's a secret message. You're not living, you're performing. And here's the psychological trap. The more self-aware you become, the more flaws you start finding. And the more broken you start believing you are. You start thinking, did I sound annoying? Was that too emotional? Did I overshare? Do they still respect me? You're not trying to impress people. You're trying to protect yourself from disappointment, rejection, and regret. You're not too emotional. You were just never given a space where it was safe to be unfiltered. The truth is, you don't need less awareness. You need less fear attached to it. Real peace begins when you stop asking, how do they see me? And start asking, do I feel safe being me? Overthinking doesn't always sound like stress. Sometimes it sounds like, what if I said the wrong thing? What if they secretly dislike me? What if I fail and everyone sees it? What if something goes wrong? Again, your brain isn't trying to torture you. It's trying to protect you. Because at some point in your life, something went wrong and nobody warned you. Nobody came to fix it. Nobody showed you how to feel safe again. So now your mind prepares for every scenario, not because it's broken, but because it refuses to let you be blindsided twice. You don't overthink because you're weak. You overthink because you were forced to survive with no guide. But here's the trap. Overthinking doesn't prevent pain. It just makes you live it twice, once in your head and once in real life. The peace you're looking for won't come from controlling every outcome. It comes from trusting that you can handle whatever happens. You don't need a quieter mind. You need a safer nervous system. Here's a truth no one tells you. The most intelligent people are often the worst overthinkers. Not because they're weak, but because their brain can see more possibilities than the average mind. Smart people don't just think. They analyze, dissect, predict, replay, and simulate every outcome. A simple text message becomes, did I sound rude? Should I add a smiley? Why haven't they replied yet? Did I just ruin everything? The problem isn't intelligence. It's mental overload. The more your brain can process, the more scenarios it can create, especially the negative ones. And when you grew up in chaos, judgment, or pressure, your intelligence turns into self-protection instead of creativity. You don't overthink because you're unsure. You overthink because you've learned that being prepared for the worst feels safer than being surprised. But here's the paradox. Overthinking doesn't make you smarter. It makes you stuck. You spend all your energy thinking instead of living. Your mind is powerful, but power needs direction, not panic. The question isn't, how do I think less? It's, how do I trust myself more? Overthinking isn't always a bad habit. For many people, it's a survival strategy the brain created in childhood. When you grow up in a home where you were judged for every mistake, yelled at for small things, or forced to stay alert all the time, your brain learned a rule. If I overthink, I might stay safe. So now, as an adult, you don't just think, you scan for danger. You rehearse conversations. You predict reactions. You replay things you said 10 years ago. Not because you care too much, but because your nervous system never got to relax. Overthinking is not your personality. It's your nervous system doing its job, even when the danger is gone. That's why logical advice like, just stop thinking about it, doesn't work. Because it's not a logic problem, it's a safety problem. You don't need a smarter brain, you need a safer mind. And that starts when you realize you're not overreacting, you're overprotecting. Healing isn't about thinking less. It's about finally feeling safe enough to stop thinking so much. Have you noticed how during the day you're fine, but the moment the world goes quiet, your brain gets loud? That's not random. That's psychology. All day your mind is distracted. Work, people, noise, screens. But at night, when everything finally slows down, your brain says, okay, now we process what you've been avoiding. That's why the deepest overthinking happens when the body is tired, but the mind is still awake. At night, there's no background noise to drown your thoughts. So the fears get louder, the memories feel sharper, the what-ifs feel real. You're not broken. Your brain is doing the same thing it did years ago when you were a kid lying awake, trying to predict tomorrow, trying to stay safe. Overthinking at night is a sign you don't feel emotionally finished from the day. Your brain is trying to close the tabs you left open. So the solution isn't stop thinking, it's learning how to emotionally land before you sleep. Journal, talk, cry, breathe. Give your mind closure before your thoughts try to force it at 2 a.m. Your brain doesn't hate you. It just wants peace, and it's begging you to make space for it.